Hello, my name is Kiana. When I was 9, my sister locked me in a basement, and my mother told me I was overreacting. Now, they want my lung. They said I was her twin, her last chance, the only one who could save her. But when I finally said no, the doctor told me something I never saw coming. You're not related. So why did they raise me like a backup plan? Why did they fake my records, forge my consent, and plan a surgery without asking? And if I was never their daughter, what was I to them? The room smelled like lemon disinfectant and recycled air, too clean to feel real, too sterile to calm my nerves. I stood just inside the doorway, unsure whether I'd been invited in or summoned. The sign on the glass read, "Family Consultation," but nothing about it felt like family. My mother, Delora, sat on the left, legs crossed tightly, manicured fingers gripping a clipboard like it held her spine upright. My father, Claremont, leaned against the window, arms folded, mouth set in that permanent look of restrained disappointment. He didn't say a word. He never did unless it was final. "Sit down, Kiana," Delora said, motioning to the empty chair across from her. Her voice was wrapped in that tight, polite tone she used when we were in public or about to break something sacred. I sat, slowly. My hands were cold, even though the air wasn't. "We need to talk about your sister," she began, as if the topic were casual, something that came up over brunch. "Varella's lung function has dropped again. The doctors say she's running out of time, but there's still a chance. You're a match." She slid the clipboard across the table. I didn't touch it. "We're asking you to consider being her donor. One lung. It's not lethal. You can live a full life with just one." I looked at the form, typed language, legal disclaimers, signatures already in place, hers and my father's. My name was the only blank space. "You're not just asking, are you?" Delora sighed sharply. "Kiana, don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." I stared at the pen she'd placed on top of the page. It wasn't just about a lung. It was about what I'd always been in this house. The fallback, the shadow, the plan B that stuck. "If you don't do this," my father finally said, his voice like concrete, "people will know. Everyone will know what kind of daughter you are." Delora leaned forward. "We've already spoken with the hospital. They're ready when you are." "When I am?" I repeated, my throat dry. "You mean now? You mean you expect me to sign this and go under the knife because Varela gets to stay the princess and I get to be the spare part?" Delora's voice cut through mine, sharp and sweet. "That's not fair. We raised you equally. We gave you the same education, the same home." "No," I said. "You gave her the world and gave me the guilt if I didn't hold it up." My father's jaw tensed. Delora stood. "If you don't want to be a part of this family anymore, just say so. But don't make us out to be monsters for trying to save your sister's life." I stood too. My legs weren't trembling. That was new. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway, still clutching the clipboard. Outside the consultation room, the lobby was busy, nurses pushing carts, patients waiting. I kept walking until I reached the center of the open space and stopped. I should have gone, should have handed the paper to someone, shoved it in a trash bin, walked out. But I froze. Behind me, I heard Delora's heels tapping closer. "You're really going to let her die?" Her voice carried, on purpose. "She's your twin," she snapped, louder now. "You were born together. You shared everything. And now you won't even share a piece of your body to save her?" People turned. I saw a man holding his child pause. A nurse looked up from her tablet. Someone whispered. I said nothing, because I'd learned that in this family, silence meant survival. Delora stepped beside me, raised her voice just enough. "Do you hear yourselves? She's letting her sister die, her own sister." I could feel the eyes, the collective moral judgment of strangers. No one asked what had happened. No one asked what Varela had done. No one asked if I had a choice. A piece of the clipboard slipped from my hand. The form fluttered to the floor, paper landing at my feet like discarded confetti from a parade I'd never been part of. Delora bent, picked it up, held it out again. "Sign it, Kiana. Do the right thing. Be the good daughter." I looked at her, really looked. Not just at the makeup or the designer jacket. I looked at the woman who had stood beside my hospital bed once when I had pneumonia and still left early to attend Varella's dance recital. "You never asked what I wanted," I said. "You only asked what you needed me for." Her face faltered, just a flicker. "I've been the backup plan my whole life, the one you called when she failed, the one who stayed quiet, polite, useful, but you don't get to ask for my body, not this time." Delora's eyes darkened. "You'll regret this." "I've regretted almost everything I said yes to in this family. Maybe it's time I try no." I turned and walked away, not out of the hospital, yet, but far enough. I didn't care if they followed. I didn't care if people judged. For once, I wasn't carrying the shame. In the corner of the lobby, I found a chair and sat. My heartbeat was steady. My thoughts were sharp. I stared at the blank space where my name should have been and thought about all the ways I'd been written in and erased over the years. A nurse passed by. She didn't say anything, just gave me a nod that felt like a thread being tied, not cut. I looked back toward the hallway where Delora and Claremont had gone. I could still hear faint murmurs, arguments maybe. I caught one word: guardianship. Legal guardianship. My stomach clenched. They weren't asking for my consent. They were planning how to override it. I gripped my chest, not out of fear for the surgery, but because suddenly, I knew. This wasn't about lungs. This wasn't even about saving Varela. This was about ownership. And in that moment, I knew. It wasn't just about my lungs. It was about control. By the time I made it to the hallway near the elevators, I had stopped feeling my legs. Not from fear or fatigue, just something closer to numbness. Like my body had decided it didn't want to carry the weight of everything it had just heard. I leaned against the wall beneath a muted landscape painting and closed my eyes. My name is Kiana Talwin, and this wasn't the first time they tried to erase me. The last time had been subtler, less public. I was 9. Varela had just blown out the candles on her birthday cake. Her party, her guests, her new dress. I'd been handed a book wrapped hastily in old paper and told to go read in the basement after she threw a tantrum when I got frosting on her sleeve. I wasn't even eating the cake. She had smeared it on me during a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Later that afternoon, I tried to go back upstairs, but the door was shut. Locked. I screamed. I knocked until my knuckles split. The lights were off. My voice cracked until it gave out entirely. When Delora finally opened the door, her expression was more annoyed than alarmed. "That's just how siblings are, Kiana." "You're being dramatic." Varela stood behind her with that same pleased smirk she'd always wear when I cried. Back then, I thought maybe I'd done something wrong, talked too much, tried too hard, asked for too much space in a house that had only ever belonged to one daughter. That memory bled into now as I stood in the hospital hallway, the clipboard still in my hand, a blank signature line staring back at me like an accusation. "Kiana?" Delora's voice came from behind, polished, steady, like nothing had just happened in the lobby. "Let's go somewhere quieter." I didn't answer. She placed a hand on my shoulder anyway, guiding me like a prop on a stage. I let her. We entered a small consultation room tucked between 2 radiology suites. It was quiet. No machines. Just a table, 2 chairs, and a notary already sitting inside, flipping through a folder. "Close the door," Delora said to Claremont, who had followed us in. He locked it behind him. I heard the click. I turned around, pulse speeding up slightly, not fear, but calculation. "This isn't a trap, Kiana," she said, smiling, stepping aside so I could see the table more clearly. "We just want to talk, like adults." There were documents already lined up, pre-filled forms, medical language, and a space clearly labeled donor consent. "You know what this is," Claremont said, voice calm but firm. "We've gone over it. It's time." "And if I say no?" Delora's smile flattened. "You won't. Not really. You just needed to cool off." She slid the pen across the table. "It's just a formality now." I didn't sit. I didn't speak. That's when Claremont moved. Not fast, measured, deliberate. He stepped in front of the door again. "Let's not make this any harder than it has to be," he said. "I'm not signing anything," I told them. Delora's face twitched. "You're not thinking clearly. You're upset. You're embarrassed from earlier. I get it. No, you don't, I said, voice low. Her tone sharpened. If you walk out of here without signing, we will go to the press. We will tell everyone that you abandoned your sister when she needed you most. I nodded slowly, taking a step back. So much for family. That's when Claremont slammed his palm on the table. The sound snapped through the room like a starter's pistol. Before I could react, he stepped toward me and slapped me across the face, not with fury, not uncontrolled rage, but with precision. Delora didn't scream. She didn't rush to stop him. Instead, she walked to my side, picked up the pen, and grabbed my wrist. You need to do this, she whispered, voice calm like she was giving bedtime instructions. Just hold the pen. Just sign. I tried to pull back, but Claremont was right behind me. They boxed me in, shoulder to shoulder, as Delora shoved the pen into my hand and pushed it toward the paper. My hand trembled, my fingers curled against it. A phone camera light came on. The notary, no longer just a passive bystander, held up the device, recording. Kiana, Delora said sweetly, tell them you're signing willingly. I turned toward the camera. My voice was hollow. This isn't consent. They didn't stop recording. I don't remember dropping the pen. I just remember the red line across my wrist where Delora had squeezed too hard. I remember stumbling backward and Claremont letting me go, almost smug, as if we'd just completed a transaction. As I left the room, I brushed past a nurse standing just outside. She glanced at me, then at the door I came from. Her lips parted like she might ask something, but she didn't. Inside the restroom, I stared at myself in the mirror. A red mark bloomed across my cheek, another on my wrist. I took a deep breath, the kind you take before a long swim, knowing you won't surface for a while. This wasn't about a donation. It never had been. This was about ownership, about leverage, about a story they'd built with me as the final sacrifice. I washed my hands. Cold water. My skin stung. I dried my palms and reached into my bag for the form I'd stolen earlier, the one they didn't know I still had. At the bottom of the second page, something caught my eye, a name I didn't recognize, Dr. Meredith Kane. I'd never met a Dr. Kane, never been examined by her, yet the form stated I had approved her for surgical authorization. My heart didn't race. It sank, slowly, heavily. Because I understood now, they weren't going to wait for me to agree. They just needed the paperwork to look like I had. I sat on the floor, the cool tile beneath me grounding me more than anything else had all day. I pulled out my phone, snapped a picture of the form, and emailed it to myself with the subject line, "This was never mine." I stared at the screen for a long moment before whispering the truth aloud. They didn't ask for my permission, they just needed my signature. The room blurred around the edges as I stood there, still staring at that altered document, trying to convince myself that what I'd just discovered wasn't as big as it felt. But the sharp tightness in my chest told the truth first. I wasn't being paranoid. I wasn't misremembering. They had digitally added my signature. I folded the paper once, carefully, like it might burn if I moved too fast, and slid it into the side pocket of my purse. My legs carried me without asking where we were going. Somehow, I found myself back on the admin floor, near the nurses' station, just outside the surgical coordinator's office. It wasn't a conscious decision, it was instinct. Somewhere deep down, I knew I had to hear it from someone who didn't share my last name. Dr. Castile was leaning over a computer monitor when I knocked gently on his office doorframe. He looked up slowly, his eyes scanning my face before they softened just slightly. "Kiana," he said, standing. "You all right?" "Not really," I answered, my voice even. "I need to talk. About the file." He motioned for me to sit. The office was quiet, walls lined with certificates, degrees, and a framed photograph of him and his family at what looked like a lake. I wondered briefly what it was like to belong to people who didn't lie. "I'd like to retract my donor consent," I said, placing the form on his desk without unfolding it. I never approved that surgeon, and I didn't sign that version of the form. He didn't ask why. He simply turned to his monitor, tapped a few keys, and pulled up my profile. "Kiana Talwin, twin sister, Varela Hale." He paused. His brow furrowed. He looked closer, leaned in, then turned the monitor slightly toward me. "There's something strange here," he said. "Give me a second." I watched his eyes move across the screen, his jaw tighten. Then he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "Kiana," he said slowly, "you're not listed as a biological relative." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I rechecked your genetics. Your file, your original test results from 6 months ago, clearly indicates no biological relationship with Varela Hale. You're not related by blood." Something inside me didn't break. It didn't even crack. It just stilled, like a lake frozen in mid-wind. "I see," I managed. Not a question, not a scream, just breath. "I double-checked when I saw your name as donor," he added. "But your mother said you were a late addition to the file and that you hadn't been tested yet. She insisted you were just slow to agree." I looked at him and smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "They lied. She lied." "I can flag this for legal review," he offered. "But it'll trigger protocol. Are you sure?" I nodded. "Yes." We sat there in silence for another minute before I stood. "Thank you, Dr. Castile." As I stepped into the hallway, the world didn't feel quieter. It felt sharper, more awake, more real. My feet carried me past rooms with people clinging to hope, holding hands, crying into pillows. And there I was, holding a truth that should have destroyed me, but instead made everything clearer. I passed a family of 4 in the lobby. The parents were helping their son adjust the straps of his backpack. He looked no older than 10. The mother kissed his forehead, laughing softly. The father ruffled his hair and handed him a juice box. I had never had a moment like that, not even close. I realized I wasn't just the wrong donor. I was the wrong daughter. Or maybe, never the daughter at all. Down another hallway, past the elevators, I felt someone brush my elbow. A nurse, older, tall, silver hair tucked under her cap, slipped something into my hand without stopping. I turned to look, but she was already gone. In my palm was a sealed manila envelope. On the front, in small handwriting, "Before it's erased again." I ducked into a storage closet down the hall, closed the door, and flicked on the light. Inside the envelope were 3 things: a photocopy of my birth certificate, a DNA test stamped private from the National Registry, and an emergency contact override document listing Delora Hale as sole guardian, effective until I turned 30. I sat down on an overturned supply bin, legs shaking. The air in the room felt thin, like it didn't belong to me either. The DNA results matched the ones Dr. Castile just mentioned. 0 genetic link to anyone in the Hale family, not even a 2% shared marker. My eyes skimmed over the medical ID numbers, the timestamps, the authentication seals. All valid. My birth certificate didn't list Delora or Claremont. 2 unfamiliar names stared back at me from the mother and father lines. The birth date was the same, but the hospital listed was different. A county hospital, not the private one I'd always believed I was born in. The override document was the final blow. Delora had signed it years ago, giving herself full legal authority over any medical decision, in the event of emergency, consent incapacity, or critical procedure. There was no expiration date. They hadn't just planned to override my no, they had structured my entire existence to erase the possibility of it. The pen slipped from my hand. I pressed the papers against my chest, as if holding them close would keep them from disappearing like everything else I thought I knew. It was there, in that dim closet, surrounded by latex gloves and old mops, that I let myself realize the truth. I hadn't been part of this family. I'd been a contingency plan. I didn't scream. I didn't sob. Instead, I folded the papers gently, tore off the bottom corner of the certificate with my name on it, and slipped it into my shoe. Because when you're no longer someone's daughter, you start keeping proof. And just like that, I stopped being their daughter. The file in my shoe pressed against my foot as I walked, each step a reminder that everything I had believed about my family was cracked open. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I walked straight to the elevators, hit the button for the ground floor, and left the hospital without looking back. It was dusk when I pulled into the driveway of the Hale house. The sky was smeared with fading oranges and purples, that in-between light that makes everything look softer than it is. The lawn was still perfectly trimmed, the hedges shaped like they were carved with dental tools. But something about the house now felt like a prop, like a movie set with nothing behind the walls. Delora and Varela were still at the hospital, which I had confirmed with a nurse friend over text. Claremont was likely in his home office, where he spent most evenings, sipping scotch and pretending his family hadn't been built on secrets. I didn't knock. I walked straight in, like I still belonged there. The house was quiet, too quiet. I stepped past the foyer, the antique mirror, the untouched grand piano, and made my way to the study at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, light spilling from beneath it. I paused, listening. No sound. When I stepped inside, I saw what I expected. Claremont wasn't there. But the smell of his cologne lingered in the air, sharp and bitter, like the man himself. I crossed the room and pulled open the lower drawer of his desk. It squeaked slightly. Inside, folders, tax records, real estate agreements. But I wasn't here for business. I was here for the bones buried in the floorboards of this house, metaphorically speaking. I moved to the wall cabinet behind his desk. It was locked, but I knew the combination. I'd overheard it once when I was 13 and pretending not to listen. His birthday and mine. I entered the numbers. It clicked. Inside were several labeled envelopes. One of them stood out, cream-colored, thick, stamped, Confidential Ethics Board. I pulled it out slowly, like it might bite. No dust. Recently handled. I opened the envelope and slid out the contents. 4 pages, neatly typed, clipped together. The letterhead read, WakeMed Medical Ethics Committee, dated April 1998. My eyes scanned quickly, faster, then slower, as the words began to land. Expressed concern regarding the ethical implications of adopting a child for potential organ donor compatibility. Requested pre-screening of infants based on blood type and tissue markers. Rejected on the basis of non-therapeutic adoption motivations. The letter wasn't vague, it wasn't implied. It stated in clinical, unfeeling language that Delora Hale had tried to adopt a child with the specific intent of making her a medical backup for her own daughter. Me. She had asked to screen newborns like fruit at a market, looking for one ripe enough to harvest. I sat down, hard, in the chair across from the desk. The pages shook in my hand. But not from fear. From fury held tightly in the center of my chest like a knot that refused to loosen. My entire life, I thought I was chosen. I wasn't. I was selected. Like a part on a shelf, like a match in a database. I read the letter twice more before Claremont's footsteps creaked down the hall. He paused outside the door, then opened it. When he saw me holding the envelope, he didn't look shocked. He didn't even look sorry. I see you've been digging, he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. That was bound to happen. I didn't stand. I didn't hand it to him. I simply stared at him. You knew, I said. You let her do this. He didn't answer immediately. He walked over to the small cart in the corner and poured himself a drink. No offer for me. We did what we had to, he said quietly. Varela needed a match. And I needed a family. I shot back. That made him pause. I was 9 when I realized you loved her more, I continued. But I was old enough to hope you'd lie about it better. Turns out you didn't even try. He turned to face me then, drink in hand, eyes flat. It wasn't about love. It was about survival. No, I said. It was about convenience. You raised me because I fit the blood type. He sat down across from me, finally. You wouldn't be here if it weren't for us. You mean alive? I asked. Or in this room, telling you that I know everything? His jaw tightened. You don't know the whole story. I know enough, I said, standing. I know what this letter means. I know I was never your daughter. I was your plan B. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but didn't. Maybe because nothing he could say would sound like love anymore. I walked out of that room with the envelope still in my hand. I went upstairs to what used to be my bedroom. I hadn't slept there in years, but it still smelled the same. Lavender sachets Delora insisted on stuffing in my drawers, as if scent could erase rejection. I pulled an overnight bag from the closet and began packing. Not everything, just enough. I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I was removing myself from a house that had never truly had a place for me. I left the photo album on the shelf. Downstairs, I found a notepad on the kitchen counter. I wrote 6 words and left it where Delora would see it first. I am not your insurance policy. Then I took the letter and my bag, walked back down the hallway, and stepped toward the front door. Claremont was waiting in the foyer. He didn't block me. He didn't stop me. "Where will you go?" he asked, his voice low. I looked at him, not with hatred, but with finality. "You raised a donor," I said. "Not a daughter." And I left. I didn't stop walking until I reached my car. Even then, I didn't drive. I sat behind the wheel with my hands resting on my thighs, staring at the windshield like it might crack under the weight of everything I'd just said. It didn't. The world outside stayed perfectly intact, which somehow made the fracture inside feel even deeper. I drove back to the hospital just after sunrise, not because I had to, but because I needed to look her in the eye. Virella, the center of the universe that had spun me out. It was early enough that the parking lot was mostly empty, still damp from an overnight rain. The air had that clean, temporary smell it always carries after a storm, like the earth was trying to hit the reset button. But I wasn't here to start over. I was here to finish something. Upstairs, the nurses at the desk recognized me. They didn't ask questions. I didn't offer any. One of them pointed toward room 615 with a look that was equal parts sympathy and caution. I nodded and walked. Virella's room was on the corner, a private suite with a view. Of course it was. I knocked once before entering, not out of politeness, but to make sure she saw me coming. She was sitting up in bed, surrounded by pillows, a soft blanket across her legs, and not a single wire or machine in sight. Her hair was done, light makeup, like she was waiting for a camera crew, not recovering from organ failure. When she saw me, her mouth curled up, not into a smile, but into something smaller, a flicker of amusement. "So," she said, smoothing the edge of her blanket, "you finally decided to play your part?" I didn't sit. I didn't move closer. "I'm not here to donate anything," I said. "Let's start there." She raised an eyebrow. "You've always been so dramatic." "I used to think that," I told her. "Turns out I was just reacting to being invisible." She tilted her head. "You're not invisible. You're just background." I let the insult pass like wind through a screen. "I know everything, Virella. The files, the adoption, the override documents. I even saw the letter from the ethics board." She didn't blink. "And?" "You were raised for this," she said matter-of-factly. "We all were. You just didn't know it." "No," I replied, voice steady. "I was raised to believe I had a family. Turns out I was just a contingency plan." She shrugged. "Still better than nothing." "Not really," I said, "because now I know, and knowing means I get to choose." She looked out the window. "You think this changes anything? They'll still protect me. They'll spin it like always, and you'll still be the one with the problem." "Maybe," I admitted, "but I'd rather be the problem than the puppet." She said nothing, and that silence, for once, didn't belong to her. I turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You don't get to own my choices anymore. I'm not a spare part. I'm not a rental. And I sure as hell am not your solution." Back in the hallway, I checked my phone. A notification blinked at the top of the screen, an email from the hospital's legal department. I opened it without thinking. Attached was a document labeled Hale Family Trust Amendment. It had been mistakenly sent to my patient file instead of Virella's. I tapped it open. It was dated 6 weeks ago. The document outlined the estate plan, Claremont and Delora's assets, properties, charitable endowments. Every line had Virella's name on it. Sole heir. No mention of me, not even as a backup. I wasn't even listed as a potential beneficiary in case of an emergency. I was, on paper, a stranger. I stared at the screen for a long time. I wasn't shocked, not really. But seeing it in writing, that deliberate erasure, was a kind of betrayal that didn't sting, It burned. I forwarded the email to my personal account, archived it, and deleted it from the hospital app. No one would be able to say I imagined it. No one could call me emotional. I had documentation now. I made my way to the front desk, handed in my visitor badge, and asked the nurse on duty to remove me as an emergency contact. She blinked. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said. "If something happens to her, I'm not the person to call." She nodded and made the changes in the system. I walked out into the lobby. The space felt bigger now, not emptier, just freer, as if I'd finally stopped dragging chains behind me. On the far end of the lobby, a nurse was setting up a podium near the media room. A camera crew was wheeling in lights. A banner unfurled above the entryway. "Family strength, a story of hope." I didn't laugh. I didn't even roll my eyes. I just watched. Delora would be speaking, no doubt. Claremont would stand beside her, stoic as ever. And Varella's face would be piped in via video, smiling weakly, receiving praise she hadn't earned. They'd talk about resilience, about sacrifice, about how one family stuck together through it all. They'd spin the story like they always had, polished, prepped, rehearsed. But not this time. I wasn't going to be the quiet backdrop. I wasn't going to be the untold chapter. This wasn't my family's home anymore. It was their stage. I stepped back from the edge of the media room just as the lights were dimming for a test run. Behind the glass, I could see Delora smoothing her blouse and practicing her pauses in front of the camera while a PR assistant fixed the fall of her hair. If you didn't know the context, you might think it was a press event about philanthropy or cancer research or some feel-good community effort. But I knew what it was, a well-choreographed lie. I turned away and headed straight for the hospital's administrative wing. My sneakers made little sound against the polished floors, but every step echoed loud in my chest. I had no plan beyond one clear need: confirm the truth, formally, within their system, not mine. I reached the ethics office and rang the bell at the front counter. The receptionist glanced up from her computer. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said. "I submitted a complaint last week regarding consent falsification for an organ donation. I need to know the status." She typed something, eyes flicking across the screen. Then she paused. "I don't see anything under your name." I pulled out my phone and tapped into my email. "Here's the submission confirmation, time-stamped. I received it the moment I filed." She leaned forward, adjusted her glasses, and stared. "That's strange. It should be here. Looks like someone withdrew it on your behalf." My stomach dropped. "Can you see who?" She hesitated, then clicked around. "According to this, the file was closed by someone listed as your emergency guardian." My voice came out quieter than I meant. "Delora Hale?" She nodded. I thanked her and left before I exploded. Down the hallway, I found a quiet alcove and pressed my back against the wall. A familiar fury returned, sharp and focused. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just started thinking, clearly, deliberately. If they could delete my complaint, they could do more. I needed a record, one they couldn't touch. I walked over to medical records and requested my full file. They gave me a printout and access to the online portal. I sat in one of the hallway chairs and started reading. Page after page looked familiar, until it didn't. My blood type had been altered 6 months ago. Originally, B negative, updated, AB positive, the exact match needed for Varela. A note in the margin read, "Override authorized." Under it, "Legal contact, D. Hale." My DNA compatibility entry had a red flag icon next to it. I tapped to expand it. "Manual override applied," it read. "Test flagged but approved for temporary clearance." My hands were still. They hadn't just lied to me. They had rewritten my identity in the hospital system. If Delora could change something as concrete as my blood type, what else had she touched? I opened my phone and dialed a legal helpline I'd saved months ago but never had the courage to call. A voice answered. Calm, measured. "Thank you for calling WakeSafe Legal. How can I assist?" "My name is Kiana Talwin. I'm calling about a potential case involving medical record tampering, forged consent, and guardianship abuse." The woman on the line took my name and details, then asked, Do you have evidence these actions were taken without your authorization? I do, I said. Digital records, paper copies, altered signatures, and correspondence. Would you be willing to send us a summary and the documents for initial review? Yes, but I want this airtight. If I go forward, I want them to feel it. There was a pause, then a soft, understanding chuckle. Sounds like you've already started building your case. I have. I ended the call and walked to the hospital's computer lab. They were mostly used for patients filing insurance, but they'd do. I signed in, uploaded every document I had, from the fake signature form to the override notice, and organized them into folders by date and category. Every file name started with Hale v. Hale. I labeled one folder Tampering, another Forgery, and the last one Erasure. Each file had a corresponding screenshot and a short summary. I cross-referenced timestamps. I even uploaded the letter from the ethics board I'd found in Claremont's safe. When I was done, I exported encrypted backups and sent copies to 3 different email accounts, one of which I hadn't used in years. It was old, under a pseudonym I'd used for college applications when I first suspected I wasn't really who they said I was. I printed hard copies and slipped them into a thick folder I labeled in black Sharpie, Contingency. It was just past noon when I stood, gathered the folder, and made my way back to the main wing. Near the east hallway, I saw Delora talking to a hospital PR rep. Her tone was light, animated, like a woman rehearsing for her next act. She gestured toward the media room. I walked past them slowly. She caught sight of me, mid-sentence, and paused. "Kiana, have you thought about joining us for the statement later? It would mean a lot." I met her gaze. "No," I said plainly, "but I did think about how far you'd go to keep the script clean." She blinked, confusion fluttering across her face, but I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned and kept walking, the folder under my arm, heavy but honest. If they wanted war, I'd give them one, with a paper trail. The folder was still warm when I handed it over. I watched the receptionist glance down at the bold letters across the cover. Hale v. Hale. She didn't ask questions, just nodded once and slipped it into the outgoing legal mail tray behind her desk. That act alone felt louder than any argument I'd ever had with Delora. This wasn't a fight anymore. It was a record. I stepped outside into the gray light of early morning. The breeze carried a slight bite, and the parking lot still held the chill from last night's rain. My car windows were streaked, catching the rising sun in strange angles. I didn't get in right away. Instead, I opened my phone and stared at the message that had landed in my inbox just after midnight. The subject line read, "You don't know me, but I knew them." No greeting, just a name I didn't recognize, Dr. Samuel Abrams, and a single sentence. I kept something I shouldn't have. He'd left a phone number and the name of a small diner on Glenwood, just off the main strip. Said he'd be there at 8 a.m. It was 7:42. I got in my car. Traffic was light. Downtown Raleigh hadn't fully stirred yet, and the roads gave me time to think, but not too much. I parked in front of the diner and saw him right away. He was sitting in a booth by the window, nursing a cup of coffee and flipping through a manila envelope. He stood when I entered. "Miss Talwin?" "Yes," I said. He looked older than I expected, late 60s, maybe early 70s. His hair was mostly gone, but his presence was intact. Steady. He gestured to the booth across from him. "I was working at WakeMed in '98, he said once we sat. "Not for long after that, but long enough." He tapped the envelope. I didn't say anything then. I regret that now. He pulled out a folded letter, aged paper, typewritten text, creases deep like a letter read and reread and hidden for decades. I was approached by Delora Hale and her husband. They wanted to adopt a child. At first it was straightforward. Then she asked if the child could be blood typed before placement. Said it was important for future family harmony. He looked me dead in the eye. But that wasn't what she meant. I said nothing. She wanted a child who could be a genetic match for her daughter. Not a sibling, a solution. When I refused to sign off on the adoption, she got quiet, smiled, said she'd find someone else, and she did. He pushed the letter toward me. It was his written refusal, dated April 1998. Attached to it was a copy of Delora's original inquiry, where she requested infant medical profiles in advance of placement. "She never should have been allowed to adopt you," he said, "and I should have spoken up sooner." I took the papers and placed them carefully into my bag. "Thank you for keeping this." "I didn't keep it for courage," he said. "I kept it because I couldn't live with destroying it." I left the diner without finishing my coffee. I didn't need caffeine. I had clarity. Back at the hospital, I emailed every document I'd gathered to a lawyer named Aubrey C. She'd been recommended by the advocacy group I called yesterday. I attached a summary of the events, added links to the altered medical files, the withdrawn complaint, the estate documents, and now, Dr. Abrams' letter. By noon, she'd responded, "We're filing Hospital Ethics Board, state licensing, and, if necessary, civil litigation." I replied with 2 words, "Do it." Still, I didn't feel finished. Not yet. I opened a burner email account and contacted a local investigative reporter I followed quietly online. She was known for her work on medical fraud and nonprofit misuse. The subject line of my message was simple: "You need to see this." In the body, I wrote, "This story has been manufactured. You're about to hear a version that omits everything that matters. I'm providing what they won't." I attached every file. At the end, I added, "The voice memo is mine. I hope you listen." Then I uploaded an audio recording I'd made that morning. Just 5 minutes. My voice, steady, telling the story from my side, not theirs. I titled it, "They Lied." After I hit send, I closed my laptop and took a deep breath. Later that day, I walked back into the hospital through the west entrance. No one noticed me at first, but when I reached the public relations wing, a familiar scene greeted me. Delora, seated at a conference table, a hospital communications officer on her left. Another staff member checking audio levels. There were cameras already being positioned. She wore navy, her signature color for serious but graceful. I walked in and laid a sealed envelope in the center of the table. Delora looked up, surprised. "You might want to read that before you go live," I said. She hesitated. "What is it?" "Reality," I replied. "Something your script forgot." The PR officer glanced at Delora. "Should we delay?" She shook her head slowly, then forced a smile. "We'll proceed as scheduled." I turned and walked out, not because I was done, but because I knew the timer had been set. They thought I'd whisper, but I was about to go live. The moment I stepped into the media room, the chill wasn't from the air conditioning, it was from the performance already in motion. Delora stood at the front in her polished blazer, navy as always, with her hands delicately folded at the podium. The lights were already in place, soft and forgiving, and Claremont stood to her right with a practiced solemnity that I used to mistake for strength. A large monitor beside them displayed a live video feed from Virella's hospital bed. She was propped up with perfect posture, her face carefully made up to suggest resilience through suffering. There was a slight, serene smile on her lips, like she was the lead in a documentary about overcoming hardship, not the central figure in a lie that had cost me my identity. Delora began speaking. "Today, we celebrate the courage of our daughter, Virella," she said, her voice trembling in all the right places. "We thank the anonymous donor whose selflessness gave our family hope again." Anonymous. I didn't flinch. I didn't shake. I simply walked forward, each step deliberate, the weight of the folder in my hand grounding me like the only real thing in the room. Someone noticed me. A camera panned. A murmur swept across the small audience. Delora saw me too. Her voice hitched for just a beat, but she recovered. "Our family has been through challenges," she continued, "but together, we found strength." I reached the edge of the stage and didn't ask for permission. I took the podium. She stepped back. Claremont moved forward slightly, but didn't stop me. Not here. Not now. I opened my folder. "My name is Kiana Talwin," I said. "You didn't hear that name during this presentation because it wasn't meant to be included. But I was supposed to be the donor they just thanked. Except I didn't donate anything. And I wasn't asked. I was used." The room stilled. I pulled out the first document and held it up. This is a DNA report from the National Registry. It proves I am not biologically related to Varela Hale, not even remotely. This wasn't a miracle match. It was medical fraud. Gasps. Some turned toward Claremont. Others whispered behind hands. This, I said, raising a second sheet, is a copy of the forged consent form submitted on my behalf. My signature was added digitally. I never saw this until after it was processed. Delora stepped forward. Kiana, this isn't the place. No, I said, calm. This is exactly the place. I slid a flash drive across the podium. It contains backup documentation, video, email, system logs. Even the original letter from Dr. Samuel Abrams, dated 1998, who refused to approve my adoption on ethical grounds, because this adoption wasn't about building a family. It was about building a match. I looked straight at the audience. I was adopted to save someone, not to be loved, but to be useful. Delora swayed. Her hand clutched the side of the podium. Claremont stepped toward her, but she waved him off. Her face paled. A nurse moved forward to steady her. The microphone buzzed as her body slumped forward, and within seconds she was lowered gently to the ground. The screen showing Varela's live feed went dark. No sound, no clapping, no protest, just silence. In that space, I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I stood for a moment longer, then walked off stage. Outside the media room, I made my way toward the ethics office, where I had a scheduled follow-up with the board's internal review team. They were waiting. Inside, I was greeted by a panel of 3, their expressions unreadable, professional. "We've reviewed your materials," one said. "There will be a full investigation. Effective immediately, Claremont and Delora Hale's legal authority over your records is suspended. They are no longer considered your legal guardians." Another added, "Varela's transplant eligibility will be reviewed due to concerns about fraudulent activity associated with her file." I nodded. "That's fair?" They thanked me for coming forward. I left without asking when they'd call next. I didn't need their timeline. I had my own. Back in the lobby, the nurse who had first nodded at me all those days ago caught my eye again. She walked over and handed me a sealed manila envelope. "This came through internal mail," she said quietly. "No return name, just this note." I opened the note first. 4 words. "You should have this." Inside was a copy of my original birth certificate. My name, Kiana Len Talwin. Parents, Lenora and Darren Talwin. Date of birth, 2 weeks after Varela. Hospital, Moore County General, not WakeMed. I closed my eyes and inhaled slowly. The name felt right, like it had been waiting. I walked back past the press room. Delora had been taken to the ER for evaluation. Claremont was speaking to staff in hushed tones. And Varela? She wasn't on screen anymore. None of them looked at me as I passed. I didn't care. This time, I didn't walk fast. I walked steady. I walked out of that building, not to leave them behind, but to carry only what was mine. The door of the hospital slid closed behind me with that familiar hiss, and I kept walking. I didn't glance back. I didn't slow down. I didn't need to. Because this time, there was nothing left in that building I hadn't already claimed or burned down. The next few days passed in quiet pieces. No explosions. No public statements. Just time, stretching out around me, filling in the spaces where noise used to live. I moved into a small apartment on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just enough. The kind of place where silence wasn't haunted, but healing. I painted the walls in soft tones, bought a secondhand bookshelf and filled it with titles I hadn't touched in years. No more grand hallways or cold tile floors, just me. Just now. The email came on a Tuesday morning. Subject, "We might be sisters." The sender's name was Ariane Talwin. I stared at it for 5 minutes before opening it. "Hi, Kiana. My name is Ariane. I live in Tucson, Arizona. I know this will sound strange, but I believe we might be biologically related. I was adopted from Moore County General in early May of 1998. I've been searching for information on my birth family, and your name came up through a mutual DNA match in a private database. If you're open to talking, I'd like to share what I found. No pressure, just a hope. Ariane. My fingers hovered over the keys. Then I typed back. Thank you for reaching out. I believe you're right. Let's talk. We scheduled a video call that evening. She had my eyes. Different color, but same shape. Same dimple that only showed on one side when she laughed. There was no awkwardness. No need to force anything. We talked for over an hour, not just about bloodlines or files, but about music and childhood memories and what it means to build a life from the pieces you're given. By the end of the call, we both agreed to submit full panel DNA testing. The results came back in under 48 hours. Full sibling match. I had a sister, a real one. That weekend, I sat in a quiet park in North Raleigh, waiting. She'd flown in late the night before, and now, as I spotted her walking across the grass, a slow smile stretched across my face. She waved before sitting beside me on the bench. You look just like Mom, she said. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I pulled a folded piece of cloth from my bag, a faded baby blanket, pale yellow, stitched with tiny initials, KLT. She kept this, Ariane said softly. She said she never stopped looking. Lenora arrived 5 minutes later. She wasn't what I imagined. She wasn't glowing or broken or the image of every perfect movie reunion. She was just there. Solid. Real. Her voice trembled as she sat. I didn't give you away. They took you. I tried. I swear I tried. But they threatened to report me as unfit if I didn't cooperate. I was 19. I was alone. But I never stopped looking. I believed her. I didn't cry. I didn't reach for a hug. But I believed her. She handed me a photo, me as a newborn, her arms wrapped around me in a hospital gown. Her eyes in that image weren't wide with fear. They were fixed with fierce, desperate love. That night, I slept for 10 hours straight. A week later, I returned to the hospital. Not for confrontation, not for paperwork, for closure. Virella was being discharged. I waited by the elevators, and when she appeared, being wheeled out by a nurse, she spotted me immediately. You came to gloat? She asked, voice as sharp as ever. No, I said. I came to ask why. Why what? Why you never told them to stop. She looked at me with the same detached amusement she'd always worn. Because it worked. I nodded slowly. And that's why it ends with me. She didn't reply. She didn't have to. I turned and walked away. Later that month, I filed for a legal name change, returning to Talwyn. Not because I needed to erase everything, but because I was finally choosing something for myself. I started volunteering at an adoptee support group. I told my story. I listened to others. I learned that survival isn't the end of the road. It's the beginning. I wasn't trying to undo my past anymore. I was building something from it. One afternoon, I found myself sitting alone on a bench in the same park where I first met Lenora. The sky was open, the wind gentle, and the sun low enough to soften the edges of everything around me. There was no one waiting for me, no one watching. And for the first time, that didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like freedom. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. I wasn't a daughter by design. I became one by choice. Some families aren't built on love, they're built on control. Kiana's story reminds us that silence isn't loyalty, and blood isn't always what makes a family. Sometimes, walking away isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing you can do. Have you ever questioned the role your family assigned you? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true stories like this one.